In today's video, I'm explaining every civilization that ever existed in the Unstable SMP, from prison cities built on slave labor to empires destroyed by orbital strikes. And one civilization at the end survived by doing the exact opposite of what every other faction tried. But first, we need to talk about Capital City, because if you think Minecraft cities are supposed to be safe, this place will change your mind forever. Capital City. Capital City started as Red Dune's answer to the lawless chaos plaguing the early server, a place where players could theoretically trade and survive without getting instantly murdered by invisible psychopaths. The city was built around a massive mining operation that forced new players into indentured servitude, grinding diamonds to pay off arbitrary debts, while Red Dunes and his warden CoinMonkey profited from their labor. The mines became the stuff of nightmares, with players like Parrot X2 and his team infiltrating the operation to steal resources and help prisoners escape. The city itself was eerily empty most of the time, just towering structures and empty streets, while all the actual population slaved away underground. Security was supposedly tight, but the protagonist crew kept breaking in and out like it was a revolving door, stealing diamonds and embarrassing the guards at every turn. Eventually, the mining operation collapsed entirely, whether from the constant theft or just poor management, and Capital City became a corrupt shell of its former self. The architecture was impressive, sure, but the whole place reeked of exploitation and incompetence. Red Dunes basically let it rot while he moved on to other projects, leaving behind Capital City Divey. Not learning from the disaster of the first attempt, Red Dunes decided to build Capital City 2.0 in a desert biome with an entirely new aesthetic. This version ditched the prison mine vibes for something more legitimate, featuring sandstone towers, decorative lion statues, and actual trade infrastructure like hotels and rail systems that made it feel like a real functioning city instead of a labor camp. The Desert Empire, as some called it, implemented high tax making it one of the protected by its reputation and Red Dune's connections to various powerful factions. The city survived multiple wars and invasions that destroyed neighboring settlements, partly because attacking it would disrupt everyone's supply chains, and partly because Red Dunes had the political savvy to stay useful to both sides of every conflict. Unlike most unstable SMP builds that got TNT'd into oblivion within weeks, Capital City 2.0 actually persisted through multiple story arcs. It proved that you could build something lasting on the server if you focused on being valuable rather than being powerful, though the high taxes and Red Dune's shady deals meant nobody really trusted the place. By Season 2, it remained standing as one of the few original civilizations still operational, a testament to playing the political game instead of the war game. So Red Dunes figured out how to survive by staying useful. But what happens when someone tries to reinvent the entire economy instead? That's where things get weird. Egg Civilization. Webu and Eggchan built this settlement as an early settlement with Eggchan. The civilization was built around a massive treehouse complex that served as both the treasury and the main residential area, with the enchanted bottle economy somehow actually functioning for a brief period. The problem with basing your entire civilization on glass containers filled with XP is that they're fragile, literally and economically. Any player with a pickaxe and bad intentions could crash the economy by breaking bottles or flooding the market with farmed XP. The treehouse design was cool aesthetically, but terrible defensively, leaving them exposed to raids from above and below. When enemies figured out they could just burn the trees or blow them up from underneath, the whole settlement became a death trap. The civilization lasted maybe a few weeks before getting destroyed in one of the many early server conflicts, with their enchanted bottle reserves scattered across the map as loot. Webu would go on to build bigger and better things, but Egg Civilization remains a weird footnote in unstable history as the place that tried to make potion bottles into Bitcoin and failed spectacularly. Currency made of glass. That failed exactly how you'd expect. But one civilization pushed Minecraft's limits so far they built millions of blocks from spawn, and that distance should have saved them. It didn't. Farlands civilization. This settlement pushed Minecraft's boundaries literally by establishing a base at the Farlands, that glitched terrain generation that exists millions of blocks from spawn. Led by master builder Horace_Altman with Parrot X2 heading the Warriors Council, the civilization organized into 3 distinct factions of warriors, farmers, and builders, who worked together to create a functioning society in one of the game's most inhospitable locations. The sheer distance from spawn made Farlands civilization nearly impossible to raid casually, requiring hours of travel or expensive portal networks to even reach. This isolation became both their greatest strength and ultimate weakness, as they could develop in peace but were cut off from reinforcements when trouble arrived. The settlement featured impressive builds that took advantage of the weird Farlands terrain, incorporating the glitched landscape into their architecture in ways that made the whole place feel alien and otherworldly. They ran missions against the invisible mafia, acting as a resistance cell that actually posed a threat to the server's dominant evil faction. The mafia obviously couldn't let that slide, so they mounted a massive expedition to the Farlands and destroyed the entire civilization with enough TNT to lag everyone's game. The survivors fled and regrouped to form District 13, carrying on the resistance tradition, but learning they needed to stay mobile instead of building permanent bases. Farlands civilization proved you could hide at the edge of the world, but nobody stays hidden forever when you're actively fighting the server's main antagonists. So hiding at the edge of the world doesn't work when you're actively fighting the server's villains. But what about hiding in plain sight? One group tried that by building into a frozen mountain. The twist is, who ended up controlling it? Mountain civilization. Built by Lopez and Arkin after they got exiled from another settlement, Ice Mountain Civilization was basically a frozen refuge for players who had nowhere else to go. The nation was carved into an actual ice mountain biome, using the natural terrain as both camouflage and defensive fortification, since attacking uphill through ice is a nightmare, even with good gear. The civilization attracted other exiles and outcasts, creating a community bonded by having been rejected elsewhere rather than any shared ideology or goals. This made them scrappy and resourceful, but also unstable, since nobody really trusted each other, and everyone was there because they'd burned bridges somewhere else. They had raider defenders who were decent at PvP, making the settlement harder to crack than it looked, but internal drama was always simmering. Eventually, raiders attacked, and despite Webu's attempt to help Lopez defend it, the civilization was destroyed. The ice mountain itself probably still stands somewhere on the map, but the original vision of a nation for the unwanted died when fenced over. Exiles building a refuge only to lose it to one of their own. You'd think trust issues would kill any civilization faster than TNT, yet one city survived everything by trusting nobody and serving everybody. Here's how. Merchant City. This settlement focused entirely on trade rather than territory or conquest, establishing itself as the server's primary commercial hub where players could buy, sell, and trade without worrying about getting murdered. The city featured towers and organized market districts, including black market sections where you could acquire questionable items without asking questions about their origin. Merchant City's neutrality was its superpower, as every faction needed somewhere to offload stolen goods or acquire rare materials without starting wars. The city didn't have a single powerful leader or military force, instead operating as a loose collective of traders who understood that staying neutral was more profitable than picking sides. This made it one of the few places that survived multiple server-wide conflicts, because destroying Merchant City would mean destroying everyone's supply lines simultaneously. The black market element added intrigue, with players conducting shady deals in back alleys while legitimate trade happened in the main squares. By maintaining its role as the server's economic backbone, Merchant City ensured its survival through pure utility rather than military might. It's still active according to most sources, proving that in a world of constant warfare, the merchants always outlast the warriors. Neutrality through pure utility. That's one survival strategy, but there's another way to stay alive on a chaos server. Control something everyone needs and dare them to take it from you. Nether Civilization. Clown Pierce, already legendary for his PvP skills across multiple SMPs, established himself as king of a fortress near the Nether spawn to monopolize the dimension's resources. This wasn't just a base, it was a full civilization built in literal hell that controlled access to ancient debris, blaze rods, wither skeleton skulls, and every other valuable Nether resource. The monopoly made Clown Pierce incredibly wealthy and powerful, as anyone who wanted Netherite had to either pay his prices or risk fighting through his fortress. He hosted festivals and events that lured players in with promises of loot, only to demand tribute or force them into unfavorable trades. The fortress architecture incorporated Nether-specific blocks and utilized the lava oceans and fortress structures as natural defenses that made attacking it suicidal. Clown Pierce's PvP reputation meant most players wouldn't even try to challenge his control, because losing to him meant losing your gear and respawning far away. The Nether civilization remains active through Season 2, still maintaining its resource monopoly through a combination of strategic positioning and the king's combat prowess. It's one of the only early civilizations that never got destroyed, because nobody has successfully challenged Clown Pierce's dominance in his own domain. Clown Pierce monopolized hell itself, and nobody could stop him. But controlling land is one thing. Controlling the oceans? That's a different game entirely, and one crew figured out how to turn it into profit. Ranger Point. Originally established as a treasure hunter base and marine complex on the Great Sea, Ranger Point started as a legitimate operation before Jaden_MAN staged a pirate takeover and converted it into a raider outpost. The complex featured docks, storage facilities, and everything needed to launch naval expeditions across the server's ocean biomes. After the pirate conversion, Ranger Point became the headquarters for Jaden's Pirates, a faction that terrorized sea trade routes and attacked coastal settlements. The marine complex design made it perfect for launching surprise attacks, as ships ships could sail out in any direction and return with plundered cargo. The pirates operated with a code that was more about profit than chaos, targeting wealthy traders and supply ships rather than random players. This made them enemies of the merchant class, but somewhat predictable, as they usually didn't bother with players who had nothing worth stealing. The outpost remained active through Season 2, with the pirates evolving into a major naval power that competed with land-based factions for control of the server. Ranger Point proved that controlling the seas was just as valuable as controlling spawn, especially once the King's Arc shifted focus to oceanic conflicts and naval warfare. Pirates raiding trade routes sounds chaotic, but at least you understand the motivation. Treasure, power, revenge. But one town survived by offering something nobody could steal or destroy: knowledge. Redstone Town. 4. CVIT founded this civilization as a haven for technical players, building a settlement centered on redstone workshops and automated farms that made it the server's technological heart. The town featured complex contraptions and systems that most players couldn't build or even understand, establishing it as essential infrastructure that everyone relied on. Redstone Town functioned as a neutral trade hub specifically for technical services, with 4 CVIT and other residents taking commissions to build farms, sorters, doors, and whatever contraptions other players needed. This made the town valuable to everyone, similar to Merchant City, but focused on engineering rather than raw materials. The workshops were impressive displays of redstone mastery, featuring things like automatic smelting arrays, item sorters, and farming systems that put everyone else's cobbled-together machines to shame. Because destroying Redstone Town would mean losing access to these services, it avoided the fate of most civilizations and remained standing through multiple conflicts. The town proved that being useful beats being powerful, as even the most violent factions needed technical expertise they could provide themselves. It remains active as a trade hub where players can get custom builds made by actual redstone engineers instead of fumbling through YouTube tutorials themselves. Being the server's engineer saved Redstone Town from getting destroyed. But what if you went the opposite direction? What if instead of making yourself useful, you made yourself impossible to kill? Roshambo Games Civilization. This defensive outpost built by player Roshambo Games was designed as a fortress first and settlement second, featuring elaborate trap systems that made casual raids nearly impossible. The civilization's entire identity revolved around defensive architecture, with every entrance, hallway, and room rigged to kill intruders in creative ways. The trap-heavy design meant attacking Roshambo Games' civilization was more dangerous than it was worth for most players, as you'd lose multiple lives and gear sets just trying to breach the outer defenses. However, this paranoid fortress mentality also made the place isolated and lonely, since nobody wanted to visit somewhere that might accidentally kill them. When a serious invasion force finally arrived, the traps slowed them down but couldn't stop a determined assault. The civilization was invaded and possibly survived in some form, though sources are unclear on whether Roshambo Games managed to rebuild or if the settlement was occupied by whoever broke through. The legacy of Roshambo Games' civilization is proof that even the best defenses only delay the inevitable if you're not building alliances alongside walls. Traps everywhere. Paranoia as architecture. That delayed the inevitable but couldn't stop it. Now here's where things get interesting. One group decided the best defense wasn't walls or traps, it was altitude. Skyblock Civilization. Webu and others built this settlement as floating islands high above the normal terrain, creating a skyblock survival challenge in the middle of a regular Minecraft world. The civilization existed on man-made islands connected by bridges, completely isolated from ground-level conflicts and visible only to players with elytras or really tall towers. The aesthetic was pure skyblock nostalgia, with limited resources forcing creative building solutions and making every block precious. This worked great for content, but terrible for defense, since the islands were exposed from all directions with no terrain to hide behind. When the invisible mafia discovered the settlement, they launched an aerial assault that the skyblock crew couldn't defend against. The limited space and resources meant they couldn't build proper fortifications, and trying to PvP on narrow bridges hundreds of blocks in the air was suicide. The mafia destroyed skyblock civilization relatively quickly, with survivors falling to their deaths or getting picked off as they tried to escape. The settlement reportedly lasted about a year before its destruction, which is actually impressive given how vulnerable the design was. Skyblock civilization proved that while building in the sky looks cool, it just makes you a target that everyone can see from miles away. Building in the sky made them visible for miles and turned them into target practice. And that's the thing about trust on servers like this. You never know who's actually on your side. Some civilizations vanished so completely we barely know they existed. Snow Civilization. One of the more mysterious settlements, Snow Civilization was built in a cold biome with snowy builds, but very little documentation exists about its leadership, purpose, or ultimate fate. The civilization shows up in category listings but has almost no detailed information available, suggesting it was either very short-lived or very secretive. What we know is it existed as a cold biome settlement with architecture adapted to snowy terrain, probably using ice, packed ice, and snow blocks as primary building materials. The lack of information could mean it was destroyed early before anyone documented it properly, or it operated so quietly that it never got involved in major server conflicts. Some sources list it as unknown status, meaning it might still technically exist as a ghost town somewhere in a snowy biome that nobody visits. Snow Civilization represents all those minor settlements that rise and fall on servers without making enough impact to get remembered. It's a reminder that for every major empire in Unstable SMP lore, there were probably dozens of small bases and towns that got wiped out before their stories could be told. Ghost towns with no history, just empty buildings and unanswered questions. But at least those places disappeared quietly. One city's geometric perfection made it die loud. Square City. Cash and Not Nico built this urban settlement with a distinctive square layout that made navigation easy, but also predictable. The geometric design created organized districts and clear sightlines, which looked great from above, but made defensive positioning obvious to attackers. Square City attracted residents who wanted structure and order in the chaotic, unstable SMP, creating a community that valued planning over improvisation. The square layouts allowed for efficient resource distribution and organized market districts, functioning like an actual planned city rather than organic medieval sprawl. Unfortunately, the invisible mafia identified it as a target and conquered the entire settlement in one of their expansion campaigns. The regular grid pattern that made the city functional also made it easy to clear systematically, with the mafia sweeping through district by district. The leaders Cash and Not Nico were killed by Ash Swag's guards, and Square City ended up under mafia control. The conquest proved that aesthetic choices have strategic consequences, and sometimes a messy organic layout is harder to conquer than a clean geometric one. Perfect grid layout. Perfect systematic conquest. The mafia cleared it district by district like they were following blueprints. And that brings us to something strange. Ruins that nobody remembers building. Exploring ruins of unknown origin sounds mysterious and cool until you realize it represents complete erasure. No records, no survivors, no story. But one civilization seemed impossible to erase because of where they built it. Another dimension entirely. The abandoned civilization. This settlement exists purely as ruins with zero information about who built it, when it fell, or what it was originally called. Players discover it as a decayed exploration site, with structures weathered and overgrown suggesting it's been abandoned for a long time by server standards. The abandoned civilization serves as environmental storytelling, letting players piece together clues about what happened from the architecture and remaining items. It might have been destroyed in early server conflicts before documentation started, or it could be a deliberately placed ruin to add mystery to the world. Exploring the ruins became content in itself, with players speculating about what faction built it and what caused its downfall. Some theories suggest it's related to other known civilizations, maybe an early version of something that got rebuilt elsewhere. The complete lack of concrete information makes the abandoned civilization perfect for fan theories and speculation. It represents the forgotten history that exists in any long-running server, the bases and towns that get lost to time because nobody recorded their existence before they fell. The end dimension should have been the safest location possible, but infiltration beat dimensional barriers. Now what if I told you there's a civilization that exists where it physically shouldn't? Under bedrock, in a glitch. The End Civilization. Parrot X2 and Wi-Fi's established this fortress in the End Dimension, building a massive domed castle that controlled access to the Outer End Islands and their valuable resources. They recruited players like Dianthibine9, who turned out to be an invisible mafia mole, setting up the betrayal that would doom the civilization. The End location made it incredibly defensible since attackers had to either find the stronghold or build their own portal, then survive the obsidian platform spawn point, which the defenders could easily trap. The civilization expanded under master builder Horace_Altman, who added outposts and improved the dome design to create the server's safest settlement. Parrot X2 promoted the End Civilization as the ultimate secure base in his videos, which made it a prime target for the mafia to prove nobody was safe. When the mafia finally sieged the fortress, the mole Dianthibine9 provided insider information that let them bypass defenses and overwhelm the residents. The End Civilization fell despite being in the most defensible dimension, proving that infiltration beats any defense. The mafia reskinned the conquered fortress as a prison, using the same defensive features to trap people instead of protect them. The End Civilization's fall marked a major turning point in Season 1, showing that even the safest places could be corrupted. A grey hell dimension under the world itself, filled with withers and gold blocks that supposedly let you revive. Nobody knows if it's still there or if it ever really existed, but we know Webu's empire existed because we watched it get destroyed over and over. The Withered. This mysterious civilization exists under the bedrock in a glitched world space, featuring gray landscapes filled with wither mobs and gold blocks that supposedly allow revival. Almost nothing is documented about the withered because reaching it requires exploiting glitches to break through bedrock, making it inaccessible to normal players. The under bedrock world shouldn't exist in normal Minecraft, suggesting the withered is either a custom dimension or a deliberately created glitch space for lore purposes. Players who supposedly reached it described gray wasteland terrain swarming with wither bosses, making survival nearly impossible even with endgame gear. The gold blocks scattered throughout supposedly let dead players revive themselves, though whether this is a custom mechanic or creative interpretation of respawn anchors is unclear. The withered might still be active in some form, existing as a hidden dimension that only glitch exploiters can access. Its status as mysterious and active makes it perfect for speculation, with fans theorizing everything from it being a death dimension to a secret mafia base. The withered represents the limits of the scripted narrative, where mysterious locations exist more as concepts than fully realized civilizations. Multiple destructions, multiple rebuilds. Webu learned that permanence is impossible when destruction drives the plot, but one empire tried anyway, and its fall was so catastrophic it defined the entire server's early history. Webu's civilization. Webu's Grand Empire went through multiple iterations, starting as an empty vault built to trick Prince Zam and evolving into one of the server's most innovative civilizations. The first version was a trap colony that lured Zam into thinking Webu was storing valuables, when really it was bait to waste his time and resources. After that psychological warfare victory, Webu built a legitimate civilization featuring obsidian walls and orbital defense cannons designed to prevent the kind of destruction that hit other settlements. The empire attracted members like Eggchan, Fenced, and builder Horace_Altman, who created impressive structures that showcased creative building techniques. Webu's approach combined practical defense with aesthetic ambition, building things that looked good in videos while actually functioning as secure bases. This didn't stop the civilization from getting destroyed multiple times by enemies like Jaden_MAN and Flamefrags, who specifically targeted Webu's builds out of personal rivalry. Each destruction led to rebuilding in new locations, with later versions including a skybase and underground bunkers that learned from previous failures. The repeated destructions and rebuilds became part of Webu's content identity, with each new civilization design trying to solve the problems that killed the last one. Eventually, the Grand Empire became more nomadic, with Webu maintaining mobile bases instead of permanent settlements. Webu's civilization proved that even the best builders and designers can't create anything permanent on a server where destruction is the main plot driver. That orbital strike didn't just destroy an empire, it proved that ego and intimidation lose to engineering and strategy. But individual empires falling wasn't the real problem. The real problem was the faction destroying them all. Zam Empire. Prince Zam built his empire as an attempt to control Spawn and dominate the early server through military might and authoritarian rule. The civilization featured Asian-inspired architecture with elaborate palaces, hierarchical housing districts, and a massive statue of Zam himself at Spawn that symbolized his ego and ambitions. Zam allied with Webu early on, offering him the colony trap base that would later cause their relationship to deteriorate. The empire employed guards like Flamefrags and young Willex, who enforced Zam's will and dealt with dissent violently. Prince Zam ruled as an absolute dictator with the famous taunt, "You are too weak to be a threat," to anyone who challenged him. This arrogance led to strategic mistakes, like underestimating Webu's engineering skills and ability to build world-destroying weapons. The Empire built orbital defenses to protect against attacks from above, but these systems failed when Webu launched his revenge strike. The betrayal came through Mainipare, who sided with Webu and helped orchestrate the Empire's downfall from within. The orbital strike that destroyed Zam Empire created lag spikes across the entire server, raining TNT down until nothing remained but craters. Survivors got imprisoned and the statue at Spawn was demolished, erasing Zam's physical legacy. The Zam Empire's fall demonstrated that authoritarian control and personal intimidation can't compete with superior technology and strategic alliances. It remains one of the most iconic civilizations in Unstable SMP history, despite existing relatively briefly, because its destruction was so spectacular and marked the end of the first major power on the server. The Invisible Mafia deserves mention even though it functions more as a faction than a traditional civilization, because they controlled territory and built a layered city that served as their headquarters. Led by Ashswag, the Mafia used invisibility potions and armor trim hierarchy to create a terror organization that destroyed over a dozen civilizations. Members ranked up through duels, with Diamond Trim marking elite killers who earned their position through PvP skill. The Mafia used chambers for instant executions, with Ashswag holding a master chamber that linked to every member, creating a mutual destruction policy where where killing him would void-kill the entire organization. They conquered places like the End Civilization and Farlands, destroyed Skyblock and Square City, and infiltrated settlements like Sleepy Nation with moles. The Mafia's defeat came when protagonists sabotaged the stasis chambers during the Doomsday Arc, causing mass void deaths that broke the faction's power. The Invisible Mafia proved that coordination and terror tactics beat individual civilization strength, as they systematically dismantled the server's power structures. Their layered city headquarters still exists somewhere as ruins, a monument to Season 1's primary antagonist faction. 20 civilizations systematically dismantled by invisible killers using terror tactics. The Mafia proved that coordination beats individual strength. But here's the thing, power vacuums don't stay empty. The Law represents Season 2's shift from invisible assassins to armored enforcers, with Lettuce K leading justice-themed warriors who became tyrants during the King's Arc. They control territory and the BAT organization, positioning themselves as the new dominant faction after the Mafia's fall. The Law proves that every power vacuum gets filled by someone, and the cycle of empires rising and falling continues regardless of which civilization is currently on top. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more on Minecraft, click the subscribe button.